Cool?
Maybe do it again and like smile more. Sorry.
Okay.
Worst comment to ever tell someone.
No, that's fine.
Be happy.
Just
Be happy, goddammit! Hey everyone, it's TA in the Delish studio kitchen. I'm gonna show you how to make French macaron. Now these are macaron as opposed to macaroons, those coconut haystack things. They're so delicious, and we do have a recipe for them. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, we are talking about those crisp, delicate, gorgeous little French delicacies. They have a reputation for being really tricky and finicky to make. They are a little tricky, but they are definitely not something to stress out about. We're gonna do it together today, and I'm gonna hold your hand the whole way. So here we have all of the ingredients that we are gonna need to make these macarons. Almond flour, confectioner's sugar, egg whites, granulated sugar, a little pinch of cream of tartar, and then some food coloring. Your choice. Today I'm using pink. Couple very specific things before we get started. Almond flour. You want to make sure that you have super fine, with the skins removed, almond flour. You don't want any like little flecks of almond skins in them. You don't want them super coarse. I honestly love Bob's Red Mill. Blue Diamond is also great. When it comes to your egg whites, do not take the shortcut of buying that little carton with the egg whites already separated. They don't whip up. Honestly, I've tried it and my meringues always go flat. Do the extra work, separate the egg whites yourself. One more thing. You're gonna wanna make sure when you measure out your ingredients to measure them by weight. Use a scale. If you don't use a scale, your measurements could be slightly off, and that's gonna destroy your chances of those beautiful, crisp, shiny macarons right from the get-go. We're gonna start by sifting together our confectioner's sugar and our almond flour so that it's ready when our meringue is ready. So you're just gonna use a fine mesh sieve and add the almond flour and the confectioner's sugar together. If it doesn't all fit in at the beginning, that's totally fine. And then you're just gonna use a spoon or a fork to kind of like get it in, get it to go through. This could take a minute and that's fine, but really make sure, it's vitally important because if you have clumps of almond flour or sugar in the bowl, it's not gonna incorporate smoothly and you are gonna wish you had. So take this step, make it happen. As you will see, this is gonna take a minute and that's fine. Look at it as your Zen moment in the middle of the afternoon to just focus on you and the almond flour and the confectioner's sugar. This may seem like a finicky little step, but if you look at the difference between what's in the sieve and what is in the bowl, that's a huge difference. Look at how fine that is as opposed to this. You may not be able to fit all of this through the sieve into the bowl. You might end up with like a tablespoon of like the less finely ground almonds, and that's fine. You can just toss that away. It should not be more than a tablespoon though. You don't wanna throw off your measurement too much. Now our almond flour and our confectioner's sugar are sifted and ready to go. We are gonna make our meringue. Now, with meringue, it's very important to make sure that your bowl and your whisk are absolutely free of fat, all right? So take a paper towel, just like wipe it down, look at it. The main reason is that if there's fat on the inside of your bowl or your whisk, your egg whites are not going to whip up properly. We're gonna get our egg whites and our cream of tartar into the mixing bowl and whisk on medium-low speed just until they're frothy. This will take about 30 seconds to a minute. At that point, we are going to increase the speed to medium and start adding our granulated sugar 1 tablespoon at a time. You wanna wait between tablespoons until the sugar is completely incorporated. This is also not a time to rush. You really wanna give it that time. Also, you wanna make sure that your mixer is on medium speed. A lot of people wanna take the mixer up to high and just like whip the heck out of that thing. That's not good for the actual meringue development. If you do that, you're gonna get a really thick, whipped up meringue really quickly, but it won't be as strong. And in a macaron, we want a meringue that's really stable, that's built of lots of little tiny bubbles. That's what's gonna do best for us here. Now all the sugar is incorporated, it's time to kick up that speed to medium-high and whip it until you get a stiff heat. You're gonna wanna watch carefully here because it will go fast and you don't wanna overbeat it. All right, so here we have peaks. You can see that it is flopping over just slightly, and that's okay. You don't want this is not a spiky hair moment, all right? You just want it to be holding its own, and if you look, you can see how shiny it is. That means that the sugar was well dissolved. So now we have our whipped up meringue, and we have our almond flour confectioner's sugar mixture, and we have our food coloring. And the next thing we're gonna do is combine them all together and fold them together in what is called macaronage. That's a very fancy word. Basically, what it means is that we're going to incorporate this into this. We're gonna do this in 2 steps. So you're gonna take about half of it, spoon it in, and then use a rubber flexible spatula just to fold it in super gently. Once it's most of the way folded in, you might still have a few streaks. You can add your food coloring. The food coloring that you use for macaron is different than the basic food coloring that you might pick up in the grocery store. It's gel-based food coloring, meaning that it's super concentrated, but also that you don't use as much of it to get the color that you need. Gel-based is very important for macaron because the regular food coloring has way too much liquid and it will throw off the balance and make your macaron runny and not puff. So, gel-colored food colorings are the way to go. Since it is so concentrated, we're only gonna use 8 drops. And the rest of the almond flour sugar mixture and fold in again until it is just combined. So you can see that I'm folding fairly gently. We have our beautiful meringue and we don't want to absolutely destroy it and knock all of the air out of it. But you do, funnily enough, want to deflate it just enough to get to the right texture. Once the last bit of almond flour and food coloring is all mixed in and incorporated, now we get to the finicky stage. All right, and this is probably the most difficult part of macaron making, is knowing when to stop folding. Some recipes will tell you to fold until the batter's like lava, but do you know what lava looks like? Actually, I kind of don't. So I like this other trick, which is to fold until the mixture can do a figure 8 off the end of your spatula. So right now, as you can see, I have the mixture, and this is underfolded, meaning it's not ready to go yet, because if I lift up, it's like not really holding. Like I can't make it happen. Well, maybe there we go, a little bit, but it's pretty tricky. It probably needs like 2 more folds. So I'm gonna give it that. All right, I think those 2 more folds did it. So you can see here, if I lift up and bring it off the end of my spatula, you can get that curve, that gradual S curve. And that's what you're looking for. If you are in doubt, do 1 more fold. But also remember that by the time you get this mixture into the piping bag and start piping, that action is gonna deflate it a little bit more. So err on the side of underfolding rather than overfolding, because you can't come back from a runny, deflated macaron batter. We're gonna get our macaron batter into our piping bag. So to pipe these macarons, you're gonna want a 1/2 inch round tip, just like this. And you can use plastic bag like this, or you can use a reusable one. Either way, the best way to get the batter into the bag is to actually put the bag in a quart container or a wide jar if you have that at home, and crimp it around the edges, and then you have both hands available to spoon the batter into the bag. Professional chef trick. So here I have 2 metal baking sheets, which I've lined with parchment. You're going to want light metal baking sheets and light parchment paper. Otherwise, the bottoms of your macarons will get brown much quicker. I also have the bowl, which is mostly empty except for a couple little bits of the batter. And what I like to do with this is use it to stick the corners of the parchment paper down so they don't fly up in the oven and touch the macaron and stick. So piping macarons is something that takes a lot of practice to do it perfectly. But you don't need to be perfect at it to produce a good macaron. The main thing to keep in mind is that as you pipe, you want this tip to be perpendicular to your baking sheet. And you want to use a nice even pressure as you squeeze out about an inch disc. After that, stop squeezing and just like lift the bag up with no pressure. Sounds difficult? It's not. At this point, you might see that there are some like upraised points in the middle of your macarons. Don't worry about it because it's all gonna come out with the banging. We are now, once our macarons are piped, going to bang the trays. Why are we doing this? It's simply to make sure that there are no air bubbles or air pockets. It's to get those out so that they don't like explode and cause our macarons to go weird directions in the oven. Basically, we just want to even everything out. Now, when we're talking about banging, we're not saying lift it to the heavens and drop it on the ground. We're not saying that. You're just gonna go 2 inches above your countertop and make sure that the tray stays level. If after you've banged the trays, you notice that there are maybe still a couple of tiny air pockets that need to be popped or still some tiny upraised points, you can take a toothpick and kind of smooth it over. Other people like to use a wet finger, like a finger that's just damp with water, that works too. Now that our macarons are piped, we are going to let them rest before we bake them. This is the most important part of getting that roughly little foot at the bottom of the macaron, all right? I'm just gonna nerd out here for a second, okay? When you let the macaron rest, you are letting the exterior dry out. The top will form this dry shell. When the macaron hits the heat of the oven, it's gonna want to expand, right? All baked goods do it. So the heat, when it makes the macaron puff, if the top is dry, the heat is gonna go out the sides, and that's what makes the ruffle. If you don't rest them long enough and they aren't dry when you put them in the oven, the heat is gonna go straight up to the top and you are gonna get literally volcanoed macarons. It's kind of cool, but not what we want here. So rest them until they're dry to the touch on top. We are gonna bake these at 325 in the center rack of the oven for 10 to 12 minutes, rotating after about 8 minutes. The good thing about macaron is that you don't need to worry about them being too dry. So don't panic if you're just baking one at a time. It's fine. They'll all come out great. All right, so they are out of the oven. They've cooled just slightly, and as you can see, they're gorgeous. We have the nice little ruffled foot. We've got a pretty flat top. They're not too brown underneath. Now, when I was developing this recipe, I made a lot of macarons and I made a lot of mistakes. And one of the great things is that for every mistake that you make, you learn what not to do. So over here, let's look at some things not to do. Right here, we have too much macaronage. You can see that these are really flat. They didn't really get the foot, they got a tiny foot, but not really, and that's because they were folded too much. Remember how I said it's better to underfold as opposed to overfold? Here, they were overfolded. Here, we have not only too much macaronage, but they were piped too wide, as in too much batter just per macaron, and so they're really huge. You don't wanna do that either. And then finally, over here, we can see what happens when your oven isn't calibrated properly. Most ovens these days aren't quite on the money. Very often you want like an external thermometer, like one of those things you can hang inside, just so you can double check and see that 325 is actually 325. Here, the oven was not where it was supposed to be, and the macarons did, I don't even know, they did their thing. They did something weird. So, always check that your oven's properly calibrated. You might not be able to sell these in a pastry shop in Paris, but don't worry. They still taste just as good. So if you end up with a pan like this, just sandwich them with jam and eat them anyway. Our macarons are totally dry, totally cool. It is time to fill them. Now you can fill macarons with basically whatever you like, jam, preserves, if you want to be fancy, You can do curd, lemon curd. You can even do like a chocolate ganache. Typically, they are filled with something that corresponds to the color of the shell. So for the pink, we're gonna be using jam, this raspberry jam. If you wanna use a spoon to fill the macarons, you can do that. I find it easier to use a piping bag. It's less mess. So if you have one, you can do that too. This is the easy, low stress part of this process. Your kids can get involved. You can make it a family affair. This is the fun deco part. So have everyone come in and make it a party. One final thing. I know you're gonna wanna devour them right away, but macarons are actually best if they mature in the fridge overnight. This is just a fancy way of saying you're letting the macaron shell and the filling join together and become one cohesive package. It's nicer to eat, and the texture's a lot better too. Hear that? That's how a good macaron should sound. Crisp on the outside, but it's gonna be super chewy in the center. Because we allowed them to have that time to rest, they puffed beautifully and gave us that beautiful ruffled foot. So pretty. This recipe makes a ton of macarons, but don't worry, you can freeze the unfilled shells, you can freeze the macarons once they're filled, all in the freezer in an airtight container for at least a month. You can also just throw them in the fridge and they'll be good for up to a week. They make great gifts, great baby shower favors, great bridal shower favors. Once you know how to make these, you will never stop impressing your family and friends. For more baking fun, stick around on Delish.com.